Welcome back to Mackey's Motors. We're continuing our basic engine lessons, engines, and I'm trying to drive home the point that we need several things to make an engine run. So I'm not going to do a big intro or anything like that. I'm just going to continue on where we left off. We recently spoke about and heard about and hopefully learned about some four-stroke, four-cycle engines. The whole process has to work in uniform, in time, in order for everything to work properly. So we have mechanisms that time the engine, like a camshaft, a timing chain, the valves, the rockers, push rods if we have them. So if the engine is in time, then we need a couple of components to make the engine run. What are those components? Well, every single engine needs fuel and air to operate. So how do we get fuel and air into the engine? Well, you need a fuel system and you need an ignition system to ignite the fuel and compressed air once the cylinders are reaching top dead center. So how do we get to that point? Well, it's really simple. Facts of physics, very, very basic science, and facts of math, mathematical equations, because without physics and math, no engine would run. We need to have a specific portion of fuel per air, and we need a specific amount of pressure inside each cylinder in order for the combustion to happen. So, taking into account amount of air versus amount of fuel, which we called stoichiometric ratio, and what type of compression we need inside that cylinder for the gas and the air to be compressed together in order to create proper combustion, you got to be a pretty good engineer. Likewise, as a mechanic, there are certain things we have to take into account when we're putting something back together or when we're doing a tune-up or anything to get an engine to run properly. How do we get that proper stoichiometric ratio to burn inside the cylinder properly? How do we guarantee that it's running within specifications so that we're not wasting fuel or we're not burning up components because we're not using enough fuel? Really, really simple. What we're going to talk about today, spark plugs and a spark plug gap. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to show you a couple of spark plugs. I'm going to show you how to gap a spark plug. And from there, we can talk about basic tune-up items. Moving forward, any future lessons are going to refer to keeping engines running, what is major components that break down, wear down, and anything like that. So stay tuned. I have an example here of two different types of spark plugs. The most common type of spark plug has a single electrode and ground prong, as you can see in the back here. And that space in between the spark plug electrode and ground is called the gap. So this spark plug is a little dirty. It's a little old, has a lot of miles on it. But in order to determine if an engine is running properly, we just need to look at the color of the spark plug. So this spark plug came out of one of the dune buggies, and my focus isn't working all that hot. There we go. You can see the color is a brownish blackish. In an ideal world with a perfect combustion, this spark plug should be a tannish color, lighter than the tan on that wall, or maybe right around that tan. That's a nice water stain from the kayaks. But it should be a nice tan, and it should be even. This one you can see is black. It's dark in color. This was not running very, very well. What the problem was a clogged air filter. And the owner, prior to me operating the vehicle, just took the air filter off and thought it would be fine. And that's how I ended up having to rebuild my engine. So this spark plug here definitely was not running in its proper range. Now, it's just a standard spark plug. We have an insulator here. We have a rod that goes all the way through to the bottom of the spark plug. You can see it right there, that little rod, and all the way to the tip. And then we have the base or the body of the spark plug, which is what grounds itself to the engine that we're working on. So, how do we get electricity from here to here? It's really simple. We have a thing called a coil, Most vehicles now are what we call coil on plug, which is very, very similar to what we're running on the dune buggies these days. And a coil on plug is really, really simple. Battery power gets sent to a coil, the coil amplifies that battery power, and then it receives a signal on when to discharge that power, and it sends a shock, a high energy shock, through this spark plug. And what happens is, because this base here is grounded to the engine because it's screwed into the engine, you have ground, you're supplying a power source through the tip, and it creates a spark in between this gap. And that's where it becomes really important that that gap has to be the proper range for the vehicle you're working on. Every vehicle is different, and you need to be able to identify when you're doing any type of service what engine is in the vehicle. And to verify that, you have to find its emission sticker. Usually the emission sticker is somewhere on the radiator support, on the firewall, or on the hood. And mine is located on the hood here. And on that sticker, somewhere, it might actually have written, which a lot of vehicles do, all of the pertinent engine information. Some of them even include the spark plug gap. Now, if there is no spark plug gap included, you would have to find a service manual, or you can look it up online. This engine here, I had to look up the spark plug gap because it's not located on that sticker. And it's supposed to be at 30 to 35 thousandths of an inch. So how do we determine spark plug gap? Now, I talked about the coil on plug design, and there they are. There's my coils, and they're bolted down, and underneath them, inside the valve cover, is my spark plugs. I would remove that coil right there by unplugging that wire, undoing that bolt, and popping that coil out, and the spark plug would be down inside there. Once you have the spark plug out, you check it to see if it's in the right heat range, to see if it's the correct color, and most of the time in automotive vehicles they are, unless you have any performance modifications like a cold air kit or anything like that. It's more important to double check, especially when you do any type of performance modifications, exhaust, intakes, any type of supercharging or turbocharging, or running different fuels that this vehicle wasn't called for, like higher test fuels. A lot of vehicles, especially in the United States, call for an 87 octane, 85 to 87 octane rating. If you're running super or plus, which is 91 to 93 or even higher, it may not be the proper octane rating for the vehicle, and it may be running at the wrong heat range in the cylinder. And your spark plugs will show it. They can run lean, they can run rich, and you can get different colored tips. So, I know that this engine is between 30 and 35 thousandths of an inch. So how do I determine if a spark plug is at that? It's really, really simple. I get this thing called a spark plug gapper. Very, very basic. They're 99 cents at the counter of any auto shop, any auto supply store. And this one is very, very old. I got it when I was in high school. I believe it was from Advanced or AutoZone when I was in high school. And it's showing its age. It's definitely worn in. But you can get them virtually anywhere. So, on the back you can read it has numbers, both in metric and in standard. And it has all different sizes. Now, this is not the perfect example because it is dirty and it's old and used. So, I have another one. This is a Champion spark plug gapper that I got from Champion Spark Plugs from completing some training. And very, very simple. I always keep it on my keychain, lots of keys. And on one side it has the standard measurements in inches, and on the other side the metric measurements in millimeters. So I know what my spark plug gap is supposed to be. I find it on this dial. Right there, there's 30 to 35, and I measure my spark plug. In order to measure the spark plug, you have to fit the gap onto the ring of the tool. So you can see the ring, as it goes around, it gets larger in width, and that is the gap of the spark plug. So I put the spark plug on here and I bring it around until it stops. And it stops right at, look close, 35 thousandths. So this spark plug would have been gapped properly for my truck. Ironically, it is the exact same gap as my dune buggy. My dune buggy is between 27 thousandths and 35 thousandths of an inch. So you slide it on there. Now, if it's not at the correct gap, a lot of them leave a little room or they have a little hook on the bottom of the tool. You can see the hook here. I can put my spark plug on there and I can bend it a little bit to make the gap wider. Likewise, they have a round hole on them that you can hook the spark plug into and make it bigger. And if you want to make it smaller, you very gently apply pressure, or some people tap them down. Now again, I said gently. Well, how hard is gently? Because I can tap this thing until it's flat and crush this in all the way. So you can see it getting smaller. But the last thing you want to do is drop a spark plug. If you damage this insulator or if you damage the electrode, the spark plug is no good. So don't drop it, don't beat on it. Pressure, gentle pressure, don't lose your grip, and then check your gap. Pretty simple, right? Now you have to do this 8 times for this truck, only 1 time for the buggy. So, in talking about spark plugs, we have to remember traditional tune-ups, some people have said have gone by the wayside, but as a mechanic you need to learn what is a traditional tune-up. And the basic tune-up components will always include pulling spark plugs and checking them and replacing them at mileage intervals proper to the vehicle. You have to check your owner's manuals or with the manufacturer, and changing other things like PCV valves if they have a crankcase ventilation. Air filters are very, very common. We need to keep on top of those and keep those clean from all our road debris and from any contaminants in the air. And anything else, I mean, a tune-up can be anything from just changing spark plugs and filters to changing hoses and belts. As a mechanic, you have to be able to realize what mileage is on a vehicle and what it requires to be running at its optimal. Tune-ups can include anything from changing spark plugs to changing wires if a vehicle still has spark plug wires, to changing coils. It depends on the mileage and what manufacturers recommend. Always go by what the owner's manual says, because if there's ever an issue with warranty claims or with any type of manufacturer flaw or design defect, there could be TSBs or recalls that may pertain directly to what you're working on. Putting the proper spark plugs is one of the most important things. Running the proper fuel and constantly maintaining what is supposed to be operating properly. Changing air filters on a regular interval or even cleaning them out. I've seen a lot of people that can't afford a $50 or $60 air filter for their car. Take it, knock it on the ground, maybe blow it off some air, and put it back in. Is that recommended? No. Can it help? Yes. But there's still contamination in that, and you don't want it getting inside your engine. And once it's inside the engine, it's tougher for the engine to burn. It's tougher to get that clean air mixture with your fuel, and you're no longer running properly. And what that can cause in the future is problems with your exhaust system, your catalytic converters, problems with too much heat, which would cause rust and corrosion on manifolds and other components like the nuts and bolts that secure those things, and so on and so forth. So making sure you know your tune-up intervals, making sure you know what components need to be replaced under a tune-up, checking an owner's manual, checking with the manufacturer, doing some online research. You can better educate yourself in knowing what needs to be done and at what interval. Same goes for any of your vehicles. If you drive hard, if you beat it, if you drive it like you stole it, chances are you need to be on top of your maintenance a little bit more often than what the manufacturer recommends. A simple check of pulling one spark plug, checking wires, checking belts and hoses can go a long, long way to prolonging the life of your vehicle and getting that better mileage. Keep checking in, Mackey's Motors, and I'll keep you guys updated.